Whether you're just getting started, changing careers, or starting a brand new leadership position, reputation matters. It is like your calling card. And in professional services, which is accounting, legal, engineering, agency, design, it's way more than just your technical brilliance. It's also about cultivating an amazing experience of what it's like to work with you. So here's my framework called the 4 C's. Those are clarity, context, consistency, and containment. And it's really a framework on how to build an amazing reputation no matter what your job is and no matter where you are in your career. Just a little note, this is my proprietary blend on how to advance quickly. So let's dive in. Point number 1, clarity. Clarity is the foundation for starting this reputation building. And it's really defined by who is doing what, by when, and sometimes how they're doing that. It's a great foundation for everything else that comes next. And let's face it, if you kind of don't know what's going on, who's doing what, who's on first essentially, and when things are due, you're already dead in the water. So we start with clarity. Have you ever worked with someone who is sort of overly vague? They kind of sort of were able to articulate what they wanted, but it was really hard to nail it down. All of us understand intuitively the importance of clarity, especially when you're being given an assignment. So if you don't have that clarity coming for you, ask about it. Who is doing what, by when, and sometimes how. Checklists, project management software, all of this usually has this built in, but there's nothing that replaces a good old-fashioned notepad and pen in a meeting and capturing this every single time you're talking to people. Another example of the importance of clarity is, have you ever heard this? Yeah, I'll get to it. Does that give you any trust? For me, definitely not. I want specifics. Who's doing it? When is this going to happen? How are you going to do it? There's a lot of trust that's built just on getting clear on what's going to happen. There's an emotional component, just a general settling when people feel confident they understand what's happening and what to expect. And speaking of expectations, wouldn't you like to know what to expect as well? Wouldn't you like to know what's expected of you? And if someone's not giving that to you, this is a great framework to keep in mind. Sometimes even missing one of these things, like a due date, can really wreak havoc on a project. I'm sure we can all relate to a time when it wasn't clear who was going to do something or when something was due. So recently, I was working with a client who had a pretty decently sized team, but all of the different team members were working in a silo, which is a pretty typical scenario to find, especially in organizations that grow quickly or grow over time with different leadership ideas. One of the things that they needed extra clarity on was what is not just every single individual doing, but what are these groups, what are these teams doing? And was there a way to create some clarity around who's doing what by when? So when we put everything into a project management system, they were able to see stuff like, oh, this campaign's happening, but it would be so much better if it was happening at the same time as this other initiative. Stuff like that you just can't do any other way. You gotta put it on paper, you gotta map it out, and you just gotta fill in the blanks. But I have never seen a team that did this and wasn't so happy that they did it. And I've never met a team who did this and thought it was a total waste of time. On the contrary, they have found it to be incredibly helpful. What a simple tool, what an impact. Next point, context. Why does this matter? And sometimes you can interpret context to mean like what's happening before this thing or what's happening after this thing or both. Context is that next step in understanding the importance of your work. Why are you doing what you're doing? Who does it impact? Where did this sort of idea or request come from? The ability to not just ask about, but to understand the context of your work is really a big difference between just being an individual contributor, being a task-oriented individual, just sort of following a linear checklist, and someone who really gets it and can anticipate how their work would affect someone else, but more importantly, how would this create real value and real change for someone else? It could be marketing, it could be operational, it could be client service. Whatever it is, context matters. So here's an example of how context shows up or doesn't in a professional environment. I've had the privilege of training so many young people who are just getting started in their marketing career. And one of the things that is so endearing is these folks they're smart, they're hardworking, they're eager, they really want to put their best foot forward. But in their rush to deliver value, they kind of forget to ask questions of why their task matters. And that is immediately apparent. A case in point, I asked one of my direct reports to put together a report on some information that just needed to be consolidated and organized. And when I saw the result, I was a little bit taken aback because it was organized. Yes, they had completed the task, but they had failed to understand that someone else would need to use this. And so there were a lot of undefined terms, stuff wasn't sort of in an easy to read logical format. And when I reflected this back to them, there was this sort of like, aha moment where they realized, someone needs to use this information after I produce it. So I hope that person never forgets that, but it's definitely a part of the learning process. If you're a little bit further along in your career, and sometimes it's not always easy to push back on what you're being asked to do, I think sometimes asking about context is a very powerful tool. Let me give you an example. What is important to you about this project? What does success look like? Or what would be a really strong deliverable? How will this be used in the future? A lot of these questions can really not only help you understand the context, but get everyone else in the room thinking about, let's articulate that. Sometimes you'll discover the context isn't actually clear to everybody, and that's a great opportunity to provide value to get everyone aligned. So at first, when I gave this feedback to the young person, there was this little moment where they kind of had this like, didn't I do my job? It was like a little bit of insecurity or maybe even frustration or insult. And as we talked, I was able to kind of show them like your work has a place and a context in the broader scheme of things. And then we're like, okay, great. And then it became clear to them that understanding, where things go after they click send on that email is just as important as getting things done on time. The next concept is consistency. And I know that sounds like a total buzzkill. It's a very boring word, but let me tell you, it is the hardest one to do, but it's the thing that seems to have the biggest impact to your reputation over time. Consistency. What is consistency? I think we all know, but just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, it is easy to show up greatly once. It is so easy to show up once and be fabulous and on point, but it's really hard to do that every day, every week, every quarter, every year. And so this is not only true for individuals or teams, but for whole organizations. Consistency matters. And I would say being inconsistent is one of the quickest reputation killers out there. If you are beautifully, maybe even quietly and subtly consistent over time, wow, that is a lot harder to do. So when I talk to a lot of professionals about their sort of personal brand or, how do they conceive of the value they bring to an organization or something, one word that comes up quite a lot, and especially in the technical professions, is reliability. And I would say that reliability is sometimes thought of as being smart, but I would argue it's way more important to be consistent. Now, I want to take a quick sidebar with this, just a little bunny trail, and just acknowledge that, consistency is hard to do, and it's harder for certain people to do than it is for other people to do. And I particularly find this, in the coaching context with folks who kind of exhibit ADHD type symptoms or have just like this profoundly creative impulse. And just showing up on time, doing the same thing at the same quality, it's draining for those people. And I don't blame them. After all, I myself am a diagnosis of ADHD. And for me, doing the same thing at the same time, the same way every time is sort of like pain. It produces like pain for my psyche and my being. So I have found ways to provide the experience of consistency. So I'll give you an example. It's a little bit funny. I would get a list of priorities to do for my boss, and it was very clear who was doing what by when and the importance or context of those things. So I had clarity and I had context. But how was I going to be consistent about this? And I realized that I didn't do things in a logical sequence, or at least a sequence that was logical to other people. I would kind of do stuff out of order, and I would kind of pick up the first thing that was most engaging to me or the most complicated, that there was some challenge or something kind of stimulating there. And I would do that thing first. I would get all my other work done, and it was definitely done on time. But the order with which I did stuff was sort of confusing to people. Well, my trick was very, very simple, and it was based on an observation. I noticed that when I told people about what I was doing when, it made them confused and anxious. But when I just didn't tell them how I was doing, and I just delivered stuff on time, they were so happy, and there was no conversation about like, wait, what's this? Why are you doing it this way? How come you blah, 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 all this kind of noise. So sometimes it's just making sure that people's experience with you is consistent, even if, just like every other human, your day or your week or your year has peaks and valleys, and it just has a natural up and down cycle. The last point is containment, the last of the 4 C's. Containment is defined very simply by, do you know where your job ends and someone else's begins? Boundaries, divisions of labor, roles and responsibilities, asks that are too much or too little. Things like this is very fuzzy for a lot of people, and I would argue that containment is sort of one of the more advanced of the 4 C's. It takes time to figure out. We're not just talking about job descriptions or titles and things like that. We're talking about the day-to-day work when someone comes to your desk or gets into your inbox and says, hey, can you help me with blah, blah, blah? And there's this feeling like, that's like, I don't know, it feels weird. Why are they asking me this? That's a clear sign that containment has been breached. And it's probably the case that you're being asked to do someone else's job. Well, what if you had a strategy to react to that? And with a clear understanding of containment, you could simply route that request to the proper party and move on with your day. I think there's a lot of conversation out there about boundaries and how important boundaries are. And yes, they are totally important. But what's also important is learning how to deal with things when someone crosses a boundary and not freak out about it or get insulted. I mean, it's sort of a normal thing. Not everyone knows what everyone else does. Or maybe needs are changing, or your job is changing, or something else has shifted, and the boundaries are also shifting. So knowing how to deal with containment is just as important as keeping eyes on, sort of your world and making sure that it's well looked after. So what happens if someone crosses a boundary? 1, know that it's sort of a natural thing. It's totally normal. We're humans. We sometimes are moving quickly. We don't understand. That's fine. 2, have a plan of how to route that either to the right person or to understand if something feels like it's not your job and then there's no clear way to route it, like what are they looking for? To help them understand or articulate to you the context. 3, people will always ask things of you throughout your entire career for things that are not in your job description, and you can choose whether or not to decline that or make it an opportunity or make it a way to connect with people or find some other way to address it that's not you by hiring staff or outsourcing services. There are great ways to address containment issues. I will never forget this thing that one of my mentors said. I was in college, and there was this one particular individual in one of my social groups who just kept talking all the time about everything, and it had no relevance, and it was almost tragic to watch, frankly. I was explaining this phenomenon to my mentor, and she kind of put forward, my mentor did, this image of, well, without riverbanks, it's just a swamp. And that mental image has just stayed with me. Boundaries are so important. Containment is important. We all need to major on our majors. And so there you have it. The 4 C's. It's a really great framework, not only to apply to your work as sort of an individual professional, but also for training other people. If you're interested in more ideas like this on how to take your reputation building, your personal brand, people management skills, and a bunch of other stuff to the next level, call us, contact us, email us at the Golden Ginkgo Group. I would be so honored to support you.